A 13-year-old boy starts living with his stepfather Lee after his mother remarries. Lee appears kind, always smiling at the family, and does his best to be a good husband and father. The boy's mother struggled to raise him alone after his father's death. When he was 9, he injured his foot on a steel bar while playing at a construction site. His mother rushed him to the hospital, where he needed immediate surgery, forcing her to borrow money from relatives and friends. While the boy was in the hospital, his mother stayed by his side, caring for him and handling all the work by herself, which caught the attention of Lee, who worked as a janitor there. Lee noticed the boy's mother. Her face was delicate but filled with exhaustion. Her clothes were worn, and she often sat alone on the steps, eating her son's leftovers. He couldn't help but feel pity for her. Over time, they began talking and sharing their struggles. Lee was a bachelor taking care of his elderly mother, who had mobility issues and mild mental impairment. After the boy was discharged, Lee often visited to help them. Eventually, villagers started gossiping, so the mother and Lee made their relationship public and got married. Since the boy's home was closer to the city, Lee moved in with them. Lee treated the mother and son well, and the boy's mother trusted him deeply. Lee explained that he often went to help his elderly mother after work, which was why he sometimes didn't come home at night. The mother found this understandable and admired Lee's devotion to his mother, believing it showed he was reliable. Because of this, she ignored Lee's strange behavior. She trusted that Lee truly cared for them and dismissed the boy's worries, thinking he was just imagining things. She believed Lee's occasional injuries were just accidents from hard work, but this only made the boy's fear and isolation grow as he noticed more strange things about Lee, like always going out at night, mysterious wounds, and occasional deep growling sounds around the house. The boy began to grow suspicious of his stepfather. Lee's behavior was becoming more and more puzzling. Every full moon, he would make excuses to go out and not come back all night. When he returned in the morning, his clothes were covered in dirt, and sometimes even dark red stains. Lee would rush to wash his clothes, acting very nervous. One night, the boy was awakened by noises outside and heard a low growling sound, like some kind of wild animal lurking nearby. He gathered his courage and sneaked into Lee's room, where he found deep claw marks on the floor, as if something had struggled there. To make matters worse, he found a tuft of hair at the foot of the bed, which looked like human hair. Lee's behavior also included other strange details. Before the full moon, he would become unusually tense, and his temper would grow short. The boy often saw Lee staring into the mirror with a wild, uncontrollable look in his eyes. He also noticed that Lee's fingernails would sometimes grow thick and dirty, with traces of blood and grime underneath. Lee always hurried to avoid the boy's gaze, trying to cover it all up. At school, the boy read about werewolf legends and began to realize that his stepfather's behavior matched the descriptions of a werewolf. His suspicions reached a peak one full moon night when Lee disappeared the entire night, and news of a neighbor being attacked spread through the village the next day. The boy decided to find out the truth. Over the next month, he secretly followed Lee, even sneaking out at night to follow him into the forest. He noticed that each time Lee went out, he was extremely cautious, frequently stopping to look around, as if afraid of being seen. One night, the boy followed Lee deep into the forest. Moonlight filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. Hiding behind a bush, the boy held his breath and watched. He saw something terrifying. Under the moonlight, Lee's body started to change. At first, there were painful convulsions, and his bones began to crack. His hands gradually grew larger, fingers transforming into claws, muscles bulging, clothes tearing apart, and gray-black fur sprouting all over his skin. Lee's face twisted, his eyes glowing red, and his teeth grew sharp and menacing. The boy was so frightened he almost screamed, but he forced himself to stay quiet, biting his lips. He watched Lee's body swell, turning into a massive werewolf, filled with wild strength. Those red eyes were filled with rage, devoid of any human emotion, and the deep growl echoing through the forest was chilling. The boy tightly covered his mouth, his fingers trembling in fear. He managed to record part of it with his phone, but the footage was blurry because his hands were shaking. Whenever Lee's gaze swept in his direction, the boy felt his heart stop. At that moment, he truly felt the danger. His stepfather's true identity was far beyond anything he could imagine, and the fear seemed to swallow him whole. The boy recorded what he could, but didn't dare get too close. The next day, he tried to tell his mother the truth, but she didn't believe him. She thought the boy resented his stepfather's strictness and made up such an absurd story out of spite. In the end, the boy realized no one would believe him, and he had to act on his own. On a full moon night, he prepared a silver knife, some ropes, and a simple trap, determined to end it all. That night, the boy waited nervously at home. He made an excuse to send his mother away, leaving him alone to face the coming danger. As the night deepened, the moon rose high, and its silver light bathed the ground. The boy watched as Lee left the house, heading towards the forest, his steps heavy and urgent, as if some irresistible force was calling him. The boy quietly followed his stepfather. The forest shadows looked particularly eerie under the moonlight. He hid behind a large tree, holding his breath, as he watched Lee stand in the clearing. His body started to change once again. The boy was so scared, he almost screamed, but he bit his lips, forcing himself to stay silent, watching Lee transform into a massive werewolf. The red eyes were filled with rage, and the werewolf let out a howl that pierced the night sky. The boy knew he had to act. He gripped the silver knife, his hands trembling, and quietly followed the werewolf. In the dark forest, the boy took a deep breath, trying to suppress his fear as he prepared to set the trap. But the werewolf was very alert. It sensed something, suddenly turning around, its nose twitching as if it had detected something unusual. The werewolf realized it was being followed. Its eyes flashed with a fierce light, and it quickly lunged toward the boy. The boy's heart pounded wildly, and he almost lost the ability to move. But he gritted his teeth, pulled the rope, and activated the trap, catching the werewolf's leg. An angry roar tore through the night, and the werewolf struggled violently, its strength nearly pulling the boy to the ground. The boy tried to get closer, to use the silver knife to end it all, but the werewolf's strength was far beyond his imagination. He could hardly fight against it, and was nearly torn apart by the claws several times. Just then, the werewolf suddenly stopped. It looked down at the boy, and a hint of recognition gradually appeared in its eyes. At that moment, the boy saw not a beast, but his stepfather, the man who had once tried to smile and care for them. Lee's eyes showed pain and struggle, as if he were fighting the beast within for the last time. He eventually gave up resisting, his gaze softening, quietly looking at the boy, as if conveying an unspoken apology and love. The boy, trembling, raised the silver knife, tears blurring his vision. He knew he had no choice, and Lee knew it too. Lee did not resist. He slowly closed his eyes, as if accepting his fate. The boy gritted his teeth, took a deep breath, and drove the silver knife into his stepfather's heart. Lee's body shuddered violently, then gradually went limp, returning to his human form. Lee lay on the ground, his face showing the last traces of human pain and struggle, a hint of clarity in his eyes. He weakly whispered his apology and love to the boy, tears slipping from his eyes, his voice faint and broken. "I'm sorry. Take care of your mother." Before he could finish, he took his last breath. The boy collapsed on the ground, feeling all his strength drained. Silent tears fell down his face. He felt both relief and deep sadness. The man who had tried to be a good stepfather had ultimately become his greatest enemy. After Lee's death, the boy and his mother relied on each other for support. Although his mother was initially unwilling to believe it, the boy showed her the evidence, and she finally accepted the truth. The experience left deep scars on the boy. On one hand, he was relieved that the threat was gone, but on the other, he could not forget the stepfather who had once smiled at him. The mother's eyes were filled with sadness and guilt. She held the boy, softly comforting him, though she herself could not fully process the harsh reality. They moved out of the house full of memories and tried to start a new life.